Miles Davis's father gave him advice that changed music history forever. What he said will shock you. It was September 14th, 1944, and 17-year-old Miles Davis had just finished practicing in his family's living room in East St. Louis, playing note-for-note copies of his idol Louis Armstrong's solos with what he thought was impressive accuracy. His father, Dr. Miles Davis II, had been listening from the kitchen, and when Miles finished, he walked into the room with an expression that was both proud and concerned. What Dr. Davis said next would become the most important musical lesson in jazz history, advice so revolutionary that it would not only transform his son into one of the greatest musicians who ever lived, but would also challenge everything the music world believed about learning, imitation, and artistic development. "Son," Dr. Davis said, settling into his favorite chair, "you're playing Louis Armstrong perfectly, but the world already has one Louis Armstrong. What we need is one Miles Davis. Stop copying other people's voices and start finding your own." This simple conversation between a father and son would set in motion a musical philosophy that would revolutionize jazz not once, but multiple times over the next 4 decades, proving that the most powerful artistic advice isn't about technique or theory, but about having the courage to be yourself in a world that constantly pressures artists to copy what has already been successful. The shocking truth about Miles Davis's genius wasn't his natural talent or his musical education. It was his father's wisdom about authenticity and his son's courage to follow that advice, even when it meant abandoning the safety of imitation for the terrifying uncertainty of creating something completely new. It was September 14th, 1944, and 17-year-old Miles Davis thought he was making incredible progress as a musician. He had been studying trumpet for 3 years, practicing religiously every afternoon after school, and had developed what he considered to be an impressive ability to reproduce the solos of his musical heroes with remarkable accuracy. That particular afternoon, Miles had been working on Louis Armstrong's solo from West End Blues, a performance that was considered one of the greatest trumpet displays in jazz history. Miles had spent weeks analyzing every note, every inflection, every subtle timing variation, and he could now play the solo so accurately that it sounded like a carbon copy of Armstrong's original recording. Dr. Miles Davis II, his father, had been in the kitchen, grading dental charts from his practice when he heard his son's practice session. As a successful African-American dentist in East St. Louis, Dr. Davis understood the importance of excellence and precision, but he also understood something deeper about success and identity that would prove crucial to his son's development. Dr. Davis had been watching Miles's musical progress with growing concern. While he was proud of his son's dedication and technical improvement, he had begun to notice that Miles was becoming too dependent on copying other musicians rather than developing his own musical personality. This concern wasn't just about music, it was about life. Dr. Davis understood that success in any field required not just competence, but distinctiveness. He had built his dental practice not by copying other dentists, but by developing his own approach to patient care and professional service. He knew that his son would face similar challenges in whatever career he chose. When Miles finished playing the Armstrong solo that afternoon, Dr. Davis walked into the living room and sat down in his favorite chair. He had been thinking about this conversation for weeks, trying to find the right way to communicate a concept that was both simple and revolutionary. "That was beautiful, son," Dr. Davis began. "You've got Louis's solo down perfectly. Every note, every inflection. It's remarkable how accurately you can reproduce his playing." Miles beamed with pride. He had been working toward this moment of paternal approval, believing that perfect imitation was the highest form of musical achievement. But Dr. Davis wasn't finished. "However," he continued, "I need to tell you something important. The world already has one Louis Armstrong, and he's the best Louis Armstrong that will ever exist. What the world doesn't have is a Miles Davis, and that's what you need to focus on developing." "But Dad," Louis Armstrong is the greatest trumpet player who ever lived. If I can play like him, doesn't that make me great too?" Dr. Davis smiled gently. "Son, copying someone else's greatness doesn't make you great. It makes you a very good imitator. But imitation has limits. You can never be better than your source, and you'll never create anything new or meaningful by simply reproducing what already exists." This conversation was taking place during a crucial period in jazz history. The bebop revolution was just beginning, led by musicians like Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, who were doing exactly what Dr. Davis was encouraging his son to do, developing their own unique voices rather than copying established styles. Dr. Davis understood this cultural moment intuitively. He could see that music was changing, that the most successful musicians would be those who contributed something original, rather than those who could reproduce existing styles with technical perfection. "Let me ask you something," Dr. Davis continued. "When you listen to Louis Armstrong, what moves you? Is it the notes he plays, or is it the way he expresses himself through those notes?" Miles thought about this question. "I guess it's the way he makes the music feel, like he's telling a story or expressing something personal." "Exactly," his father replied. "And that personal expression, that's what makes him special. That's his voice. You can learn his notes, but you can't learn his voice, because his voice comes from his experiences, his personality, his unique way of seeing the world." Dr. Davis leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. "Miles, you have your own experiences, your own personality, your own way of seeing the world. You have your own voice inside you. But as long as you're focused on copying someone else's voice, you'll never discover your own." This advice was radical for several reasons. In 1944, most musical education was based on imitation. Students were expected to copy their teachers and established masters until they had absorbed traditional techniques and styles. The idea that a 17-year-old should focus on developing his own voice rather than mastering established traditions challenged conventional wisdom about musical learning. Dr. Davis was essentially telling his son to take a significant risk. Copying Louis Armstrong was safe. It guaranteed that Miles would sound good, because he was reproducing music that was already proven to be excellent. Developing his own voice meant venturing into uncharted territory where there were no guarantees of success. But Dr. Davis understood something crucial about artistic development that most people missed. He knew that true innovation required the courage to abandon safety and explore unknown possibilities. He had observed this principle in his own professional life, where his most successful innovations in dental practice had come from trying new approaches rather than simply copying what other dentists were doing. "I want you to try an experiment," Dr. Davis said. "For the next month, I don't want you to practice any solos by other musicians. Instead, I want you to work on improvisation. Play along with records, but create your own solos. Don't worry about whether they're good or bad. Just focus on expressing what you feel through the music." Miles was terrified by this suggestion. Improvisation felt like jumping off a cliff without knowing where he would land. When he copied other musicians' solos, he knew exactly what he was supposed to play and how it should sound. Improvising meant facing the possibility of failure, of creating something that sounded terrible. "What if I'm not good at improvising?" Miles asked. "What if I don't have anything original to say?" Dr. Davis smiled. "Son, you're 17 years old. You've lived 17 years of experiences that no one else has lived. You've felt things that no one else has felt in exactly the same way. You have plenty to say. You just need to learn how to say it through your music." This conversation marked a turning point not just in Miles's musical development, but in his understanding of what it meant to be an artist. His father was teaching him that artistry wasn't about technical perfection or adherence to tradition, but about authentic self-expression. Over the following weeks, Miles began the difficult and often frustrating process of developing his own musical voice. His first attempts at improvisation were awkward and uncertain, filled with false starts and musical ideas that didn't quite work. But Dr. Davis encouraged him to persist, reminding him that every great musician had gone through this same process of discovery. Gradually, something remarkable began to happen. Miles started to develop musical ideas that didn't sound like Louis Armstrong or any other established musician. They sounded like Miles Davis, tentative and imperfect at first, but unmistakably original. Dr. Davis noticed these changes and provided crucial encouragement during this vulnerable period. "I can hear you in your playing now," he told Miles after one practice session. "You're starting to sound like yourself, instead of like someone else. That's the most important thing any musician can achieve." This advice would prove to be prophetic. Over the next 4 decades, Miles Davis would become famous not for his ability to imitate other musicians, but for his relentless pursuit of his own unique voice. He would revolutionize jazz multiple times, with the bebop movement, cool jazz, hard bop, modal jazz, and jazz fusion, always by refusing to copy what already existed and instead pushing forward into unexplored musical territory. The principle that Dr. Davis had taught his son, that authentic self-expression was more valuable than perfect imitation, became the foundation of Miles's entire artistic philosophy. It explained why he constantly changed his musical style, why he refused to repeat successful formulas, and why he was always moving forward rather than looking backward. Years later, when Miles became famous for his innovative approaches to jazz, he would often credit his father's advice as the most important musical lesson he had ever received. "My father taught me that the goal isn't to be like someone else," Miles would say in interviews. "The goal is to be yourself, but to be the best version of yourself possible." This advice also influenced how Miles approached working with other musicians. Instead of trying to get his band members to sound like established styles, he encouraged them to develop their own unique voices. This approach led to some of the most innovative music in jazz history, as musicians like John Coltrane, Bill Evans, and Herbie Hancock were able to explore their own artistic visions while contributing to Miles's musical projects. The shocking truth about Miles Davis's revolutionary career was that it all stemmed from a simple conversation with his father about the importance of authenticity. Dr. Davis had recognized that his son had the potential to be more than just a skilled imitator. He could be an innovator, but only if he had the courage to trust his own musical instincts. This lesson extended beyond music into every aspect of Miles's life. He became known for his uncompromising artistic vision, his refusal to pander to commercial expectations, and his constant evolution as a creative artist. These characteristics could all be traced back to his father's advice about developing his own voice rather than copying others. Dr. Davis had understood something that many parents and teachers miss, that the goal of education should not be to produce conformity, but to help each individual discover and develop their unique potential. By encouraging Miles to stop imitating and start creating, he had set in motion one of the most innovative careers in American music. The impact of this father-son conversation extended far beyond Miles Davis himself. The musicians who worked with Miles absorbed his philosophy of innovation and authenticity, and they carried this approach into their own careers. The influence rippled through generations of musicians who learned that artistic success came not from copying what had been done before, but from having the courage to explore new possibilities. The impact of his father-son conversation extended far beyond Miles Davis himself. The musicians who worked with Miles absorbed his philosophy of innovation and authenticity, and they carried this approach into their own careers. The influence rippled through generations of musicians who learned that artistic success came not from copying what had been done before, but from having the courage to explore new possibilities. John Coltrane, who worked with Miles during the 1950s, would later say that Miles taught him the most important lesson of his career. Don't play what's there, play what's not there. This advice, which clearly echoed Dr. Davis's original wisdom about developing one's own voice, became central to Coltrane's revolutionary approach to saxophone playing. Bill Evans, the pianist who contributed to some of Miles's most innovative recordings, credited Miles with teaching him to trust his own musical instincts rather than relying on established jazz piano traditions. Miles showed me that individuality was more important than conformity. He taught me to listen to my inner voice rather than trying to sound like other piano players. This philosophy of authentic self-expression became so central to Miles's approach that he would often hire musicians not because they could play in established styles, but because they had something unique to offer. He was constantly searching for musicians who had developed their own voices, understanding that the combination of multiple original voices would create something that had never been heard before. The recording sessions for albums like Kind of Blue, Sketches of Spain, and Bitches Brew were direct applications of the principle that Dr. Davis had taught his son in 1944. Miles would bring together musicians with distinct individual voices and create environments where they could explore their own musical ideas while contributing to a collective vision. This approach was revolutionary in the music industry, where most band leaders wanted musicians who could reproduce established sounds with precision and reliability. Miles's method was riskier, but ultimately more rewarding, producing music that was constantly evolving and surprising. The commercial success of Miles's innovative approach proved that Dr. Davis's advice had been not just artistically sound, but also commercially viable. Albums that feature Miles's unique voice and his collaborators' individual contributions became some of the best-selling jazz recordings of all time, demonstrating that audiences were hungry for authentic, original music rather than imitative performances. Dr. Davis's wisdom about authenticity also influenced how Miles approached his personal style and public persona. Just as he refused to copy other musicians' sounds, he refused to adopt other performers' stage presence or fashion choices. His distinctive style of dress, his famous habit of playing with his back to the audience, and his minimal stage banter all reflected his commitment to being authentic rather than giving audiences what they expected. This authenticity extended to his business relationships as well. Miles was known for his uncompromising negotiations with record labels, his refusal to compromise his artistic vision for commercial considerations, and his insistence on maintaining creative control over his music. These characteristics, which sometimes created conflicts with industry executives, were direct applications of his father's advice about staying true to his own voice. The educational impact of Dr. Davis's philosophy became evident as Miles's former students and collaborators became teachers themselves. Musicians who had learned from Miles began passing on the same lesson about the importance of developing individual voices rather than copying established styles. Jazz education programs around the world began incorporating this philosophy, teaching students to find their own musical personalities rather than simply mastering traditional techniques. This shift in educational approach had profound implications for jazz as an art form. Instead of becoming a museum piece that preserved traditional styles, jazz continued to evolve and innovate, as each generation of musicians brought their own unique perspectives and voices to the music. The vitality and continued relevance of jazz could be traced directly to the principle that Dr. Davis had articulated in that 1944 conversation. The psychological impact of his father's advice was equally important to Miles's development as an artist and as a person. By encouraging his son to trust his own instincts and develop his own voice, Dr. Davis had given Miles the confidence to take artistic risks throughout his career. This confidence enabled Miles to experiment with new musical approaches, even when critics and audiences were skeptical or hostile. Miles's willingness to abandon successful formulas in favor of unexplored possibilities, moving from bebop to cool jazz to hard bop to modal jazz to fusion, demonstrated the lasting impact of his father's lesson about the importance of continuous growth and authentic self-expression rather than safe repetition of proven formulas. The cultural significance of Dr. Davis's advice extended beyond music into broader questions about creativity, education, and individual development. His insight that authentic self-expression was more valuable than skillful imitation challenged conventional approaches to teaching and learning in many fields. In his final years, Miles would often reflect on this conversation with his father and recognize it as the moment when his real musical education had begun. "Everything I accomplished in music," he said, "started when my father told me to stop trying to be Louis Armstrong and start trying to be Miles Davis. That conversation changed my life because it taught me that my value as an artist would come not from how well I could copy others, but from what I could contribute that was uniquely mine." Dr. Miles Davis II had passed away in 1962, but his son would carry his wisdom throughout his career, applying it not just to music, but to every aspect of his artistic and personal life. The advice had been simple: develop your own voice rather than copying others, but its implications were profound and lasting. The legacy of that conversation continues to influence musicians today. When young artists study Miles Davis's career, they learn not just about his musical innovations, but about his approach to authenticity and individual expression. Music schools around the world now teach courses that emphasize the development of personal voice and style, reflecting the educational philosophy that Dr. Davis had articulated decades earlier. The advice that Dr. Miles Davis II gave his son in 1944 became one of the most influential pieces of musical wisdom in history, proving that sometimes the most powerful lessons come not from formal teachers or established institutions, but from parents who understand that their children's greatest potential lies not in copying others, but in discovering and developing their own unique voices. This single profound conversation between father and son fundamentally changed the entire trajectory of American music history and demonstrated the transformative power of believing in authentic self-expression over safe imitation. If this story of paternal wisdom, the courage to be authentic, and how one conversation can change the course of artistic history moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share this video with any parent who wants to encourage their child's unique potential, any artist who has ever struggled between imitation and innovation, or anyone who needs to understand that true success comes not from copying others, but from having the courage to be yourself. Have you ever received advice that completely changed your approach to your craft or your life? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to check out more stories about the power of authentic self-expression and the importance of finding your own voice in a world that often pressures us to conform.